And just a reminder that Dr. K's guides to mental health are going to be dropping probably in August. So it's a chance for people to get a more kind of personalized experience on a mental health journey. The way that it's kind of organized is sort of like I think about what I do with actual clients. And what I do with clients is not like, one size fits all solution. It's sort of like a branching logic. And so the goal of the guides is to actually like kind of walk that branching journey that you sort of pick at each of the branch points, like what you want to do. Obviously you can do it all, but it really sort of is designed to be like similar to what happens in my head when I'm sitting down with a person. It's going to hopefully be ready in August. Pre-orders are available now. Okay. So today we are going to talk a little bit about why men struggle in relationships. And this is a really important topic because I think that a lot of times we're conditioned in a particular way, we're raised in a particular way, and it tends to create problems in our relationship. So this lecture is really geared at people who sort of like fit the following kind of like criteria, okay? So if you feel like the stuff that I'm about to say applies to you, hopefully this will be helpful. So the first thing is that you're confused by inner turmoil. Like when you're in a relationship, sometimes you feel angry, sometimes you feel frustrated and upset, but you also feel really stupid for feeling that way. Second reason that this may apply to you is that you feel like sometimes other people do a bad job in a relationship, but you have a lot of trouble articulating what they're doing wrong. Third reason that this may be relevant to you is that you're someone who kind of feels cold or numb in a relationship, kind of like a robot. Like some parts of you want to connect with people more authentically, but you keep them at arm's length. You tend to become really uncomfortable when people get too close, but you also don't want them to leave. So it's sort of like you get stuck in this kind of like limbo zone where you want to be closer to people, but you kind of push them away if they get too close. And at the same time, like you don't want to really leave or you don't want them to leave. And so sometimes you get so frustrated with it all that there's a part of you that's like, I just want to piece out of this and just be done with it all. And so this is something that I've seen more commonly in men. It can certainly happen in women as well. But we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about men because some of the things that I think some of the way that we're conditioned and raised as men makes us more vulnerable to some of these states. Now, the next thing to kind of think about is that y'all could be dating someone who's like this. So if you're in a relationship with someone, here are some of the signs that it looks like from a partner's perspective. The first and foremost is mixed signals, okay? This is where like someone will say to you, like your partner will say to you, I'm fine, nothing is wrong, when like clearly something is wrong. Sometimes your partner will get moody without a clear explanation. And when you ask them like what's wrong, they either don't tell you or they're not even able to tell you. Like it's clear that they're upset about something, but when you're like, what's wrong? They're like, nothing is wrong. Nothing's wrong. And in good cases, usually we see this pattern where like people will be moody for like a week and they'll kind of like naturally come out of it and they'll be back to their normal selves. In more severe or kind of like negative situations, what actually happens is that people will like hold on to and harbor resentment. That moodiness sort of lingers in a relationship and can really start to create toxicity. Sometimes partners can get very confused when like your partner gets mad at you for seemingly like benign or trivial things. And the last thing is, once again, that your partner kind of keeps you at arm's length. So like they're kind of sending you mixed signals that they want to be closer. Maybe they want to be more intimate, want to be more authentic, want to be connected. But anytime you try to get close to them or you start to get close to them, they push you away. So this is kind of like, it's been my observation that men sometimes struggle in relationships due to these things. And so what we're going to try to do, it can certainly happen to women as well, or, non-binary people. But at the end of the day, I see the pattern more commonly in men. And so what we're going to do is try to explain to y'all, why does this happen? Why are we socialized this way? What is sort of going on psychologically and scientifically, like in our minds and our development that leads us to this way. And then we're going to end up with sort of practical tips as to what to do about it going forward. So it turns out that a lot of this stuff has to do with something called attachment theory, okay? So what we're going to do is explain a little bit about attachment theory. This starts off with discussing something called the strange situation. So there was a great psychoanalyst named John Bowlby, who I think back in the 70s designed a really interesting experiment called the strange situation. So in the strange situation, what you've got is a mother, usually, and a kid, and they're in a room. And then what happens is mom leaves the room, and then a stranger enters the room. Okay? So stranger comes in and mom leaves. So now the kid is suddenly like alone with a stranger. And then what happens a little while later is mom usually comes back into the room and is kind of back. And so what Bowlby kind of noticed is that there are actually like a lot of different ways that the child actually responds to this situation. And so over time, there were other researchers who kind of contributed to this work. And eventually, they sort of came up with 4 kinds of what we call attachment. So the first kind of attachment is something called secure attachment. So what happens in this case is the parent leaves the room, and in secure attachment, the child may start to cry when the stranger enters, so they'll cry. But when mom comes back, they are easily comforted. So they like calm down real quick. Like if mom is around, I'm totally fine. Like it's not a big deal. They also noticed that there was a second set of kids who, when mom leaves, they also start to cry. But when mom comes back, they seem to be like really, really like torn. So they start to get like kind of clingy, but then also like are sort of like not quite as clingy as another set of kids. They tend to like get a little bit frustrated, get a little bit angry, tend to be like kind of like confused. Like they want to go to mom for affection, but they sort of like feel torn and they seem kind of like stuck. They kind of start to send mixed signals. Okay. And then the third type is the anxious avoidant attachment. And these kids, it's really interesting. So like when mom leaves, they start to become anxious. They may start to cry. But when mom comes back, they actually like don't go to mom for comfort. And instead what they do is they sort of like become kind of like independent. And they'll sort of like, they won't go to mom for comfort, even though they're kind of upset, and they'll sort of like remain independent. They'll move somewhat close to mom. So they'll like move like a little bit closer, but they won't actually go to mom for like comfort or security. And then the last category of people, so like they sort of remain independent. And the last category of people have insecure attachment, which is they freak out when mom leaves the room. And even when mom returns, they're inconsolable. So they'll start to cry when mom leaves. And even when mom comes back, like they'll still continue crying. And what we're going to focus on is actually these two. Okay, so this is like what we're going to talk about today. So the anxious ambivalent attachment style and the anxious avoidant attachment style. And essentially what Bowlby discovered is that these kinds of responses actually have a lot to do with the way that we're raised, or that was his theory anyway. And he sort of realized that when caregivers give us inconsistent responses to our need for affection, we end up as anxious ambivalent. So what that sort of means is if I like hurt my leg and I get a boo-boo and I go to mom, how does mom respond to me? So for the people with secure attachment, every time I get hurt, mom is there and is comforting. For insecure attachment, it gets a little bit complicated, but generally speaking, we can say that mom is not very comforting or parents aren't very comforting. For the anxious ambivalent attachment style, what we see is inconsistent caregiving. This is going to be somewhat true of avoidant as well. But sometimes mom is like really is really warm and loving, and other times like mom is like not warm and loving. And so what that does is tends to confuse us. And so we never know, like this child, the anxious ambivalent child, never knows like what to expect. And so what that means is that there's a part of them that's like, okay, let me go and like get comfort from mom. But then there's also part of them that's like, well, sometimes when I get comfort from mom, like mom sort of gets like, doesn't give me what I need. And so what that sort of results in is kind of this like clinical presentation of mixed signals. So like this is what this kind of looks like. So it's really characterized by mixed signals, okay? And what we mean by mixed signals is like these can be internal or external. So in the relationship, you can send signals to someone that, you're upset, but at the same time, like if they ask you, are you upset? You're going to say no. So are you upset? And then you say no, but you mean yes. So that's one key characteristic of the anxious ambivalent attachment style. The other thing is that this mixed signal doesn't have to be external. It can also be internal. So these people have inner turmoil. So they feel a lot of like internal conflict, feeling frustrated, angry, upset. And then they also feel like very stupid for feeling that way. So they're like kind of confused internally. They're like, I don't understand why I'm so upset or angry. Like, I don't really know what's wrong. And sometimes what happens is that these people actually like, they have a lot of difficulty in relationships because there are things that will set them off. So they get ticked off, but they're not really able to articulate what it is that's wrong, right? So this kind of goes back to the mixed signals because like, are you upset? Like clearly I'm upset, but I'm not able to articulate like what's wrong. And the reason for that actually has to do with the roots of how like these attachment styles develop, which is emotional mirroring. So what happens when we're young is that we don't really understand what we feel emotionally. And so the way that we discover and start to learn our internal emotional state is through the mirroring of the adults around us. So this is best exemplified by this example of like, you know, when there's a kid that's running around like a toddler and they trip and fall. And then like there's a brief moment where the toddler will look around at the adults in the room. If the adults in the room freak out and express to the child, oh my God, are you okay? Then the toddler will start crying. But if all of the adults start laughing, the toddler will be like, ha, 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 I'm not hurt at all. So it's kind of like really fascinating because early on, like you can think about, you know, if I'm a 1-year-old, like how do I know what I'm feeling? The way that I know what I'm feeling is through the emotional expressions of people around me. So like when I'm a child and I get a boo-boo and I go to mom and mom is like, oh, you poor baby, let me like help you, let me make it feel better. So I'm feeling hurt, mom expresses concern, and the world makes sense. So things get really confusing when that emotional mirroring is inconsistent. So when I'm hurt and mom tells me to like, shut the hell up and sit down, then it's like, I'm like, wait, what? How does this work? When I feel this way and mom tells me to shut the hell up, did I do something wrong? And then at other times when mom's in a good mood and I hurt myself and I go to mom and she's like, oh, you poor thing. And so it's like really confusing. Like, what do I feel? Is the feeling that I have good or is the feeling that I have bad? Like, what is this emotion? And so children are actually like, they don't know what their internal feeling is. And this is further reinforced by, especially this is thankfully changing now, but like, you know, by the conditioning that we tend to do towards boys versus girls. Right? So this is like starting to even out, but if you go to most parts of the world, it really isn't. Where, you know, boys are told to like not express emotion, essentially, right? We won't say that explicitly. We won't even say don't express emotion because we don't even have that degree of EQ. What we'll say is like man up or stop crying or boys don't cry or you need to do this or you need to man up or like whatever, right? If you're hanging out at school and you start crying, like what are the other kids going to do to you? Like the kids are going to make fun of you. Right? And like even teachers will sometimes like treat you poorly. You know, parents, siblings, things like that. Like we're not taught to express emotion. And so the interesting thing is as we are taught to not express emotion, our ability to learn what our emotional state is gets handicapped. Right? Because remember, the way that we learn what our internal emotional state is through the emotional mirroring of other people. So when I stop communicating with people about what my emotional state is, like even if I don't know what it is, if I stop talking about it and I just kind of manage it on my own, what I'm essentially relying on is like parts of my brain to like acclimatize and just turn off. So I don't actually learn anything. So there's interesting research that shows that, you know, if you get angry, you're not going to stay angry for 10 years. There's our brain has a natural homeostatic mechanism, which sort of explains the week of moodiness, right? So you feel really moody, you feel upset by something, you're not quite sure what you're upset by, you feel kind of angry, you feel kind of confused, and this is all because you were never taught like how to understand what you feel, because people tend to be socialized or conditioned to not express their feelings and like not communicate with other people. This gets further compounded by the fact that like if you think about, you know, dads, like your dad, let's say you're 20 years old now and your dad became a dad in 2001. And so then like you think about your dad's upbringing, right? So like your dad may have been born like in 1970. And so what was his emotional understanding, and how does he pass on that emotional understanding onto you, right? Because like, how is your dad going to teach you if he never learned like how to be in touch with his emotions? So we see like definitely a conditioning effect, a socializing effect that leads to ignorance of your internal emotional state, probably through a lack of mirroring, as well as like social conditioning that leads us to be confused about what our internal emotional state is. And so we wind up with this anxious ambivalent attachment style, which is one of the two things that we're going to cover, which is sort of like all about turmoil, confusion, ambivalence, and like mixed signals. And this can make relationships really, really difficult because like there can be something that upsets you, but then you can't articulate to the person like what they did wrong. And the reason that you can't articulate may be because of some amount of emotional vulnerability, some amount of self-judgment. So this is really common where people like, they feel stupid telling this person, yeah, like you did this, like you didn't call me like on Thursday and like that really hurt my feelings. Like we're just not taught how to say things like that. Because what we're actually taught, like you have this voice in your head that's like, you shouldn't feel that way. Like what difference does it make? Like you should be able to handle it if your girlfriend doesn't call you on a Thursday, like even if it's kind of an important day to you. Like you should grow the fuck up, man. Like, come on. Right? So like that's that anxious ambivalent attachment style kind of like coming through, right? And so as that kind of shame and as that self-judgment arises, it makes it difficult for you to communicate and then causes problems in the relationship because then your girlfriend is kind of like, I don't know what I did wrong. Did I do something wrong? You're like, no, I'm fine. And then you just kind of like wait a week and then you start to feel a little bit better and then you kind of forget about it. So a couple of other interesting things. So people with an anxious ambivalent attachment style also have a couple of interesting behavioral correlations. We're not going to go too much into that, but it's really interesting because these people have low self-esteem, which sort of makes sense. They also have a low amount of intrinsic motivation, which is really fascinating. So for a lot of people who feel like, oh, I'm lazy, I'm undisciplined, there are actually studies that show that low intrinsic motivation is associated with a particular kind of attachment style. And sometimes y'all may understand this because like, there are the people who are just like good at life that are not like us. Like they're emotionally in touch with themselves. They're like confident, they're brave, and they go out and they work hard and they do their resume on time and they study for their tests and they apply like for things at the right time. Like, there are those people and we get so confused because like, why do these people have what seems like everything? And we have nothing. And it turns out that there are actually like correlations, right? Like, so there are correlations between secure attachment, confidence, and intrinsic motivation. And if you're one of those people, fantastic. So I used to be an anxious ambivalent kind of person, or even anxious avoidant, which we'll get to. And now I think I've got pretty secure attachment. All right. So anxious ambivalent attachment is what we call a resistant attachment. So what this means is that it's an attachment that's characterized by feelings of both anger and helplessness. When the caregiver returns, the child is ambivalent. They seek contact, but also rebuff it. It's kind of like this conditional strategy to preemptively take control of the interaction. So what this sort of means is that I'm going to keep you at arm's length so that you can't hurt me by leaving again. But I also want you to be close to me. I don't really like this situation, but it's the best thing that I can do to protect myself. Like it's kind of, you're stuck between wanting more in a relationship and also not wanting to be hurt again, okay? So what this sort of means is like, this is what the mixed signals are, because there's a part of you that's like, if I put myself out there and I let this person connect to me, which is really what I want, what that means is that they could leave the room again. And then I'm going to be left like all on my own. And so like, it really is sort of like this protective mechanism that we sort of engage in, where there's a part of us that wants to reach out and connect, and there's a part of us that's like, don't do that because they're just going to hurt you again. And so what this means is when people sort of kind of going back to the motivation thing, what this ambivalence means, so ambivalence means being like, 50% yes and 50% no, being on the fence, this is what sort of leads to this like intrinsic lack of motivation. Because what happens is these people are always on the fence, right? There's a part of you that's saying like, I want to apply for this job. And there's a part of you that's saying, but if you apply for the job, you could get rejected and that's going to hurt. So this is sort of what the anxious ambivalent attachment style looks like, which is a resistant attachment. Like I am attached, but I'm like not thrilled about it. So that's the anxious ambivalent attachment. Now what we're going to talk about is the anxious avoidant attachment. So the anxious avoidant attachment is going to be like present like this, okay? So it's going to be like the emotional robot is what I call it. So you guys may know, you may feel this way, or you may be like this, or you may know someone like that. So it was people who are like numb and cold. So like they're also fiercely independent. And so we'll go more into this. But like this is people who have like sort of a safe zone. You kind of have this place where you like to hang out. And that place is like not too close, but also not too far, right? You're not like antisocial and don't form relationships at all. What it is like you want to be in this really safe zone where like you can remain independent. You don't have to rely on anyone, where like you don't have to feel emotionally hurt and you don't have to feel connected. From a partner perspective, these people, so from the partner perspective, your partner keeps you at arm's length. They don't want you to come close, but they don't want you to get too far. So we're going to stay in the safe zone. And the problem with this is that these people, even though they feel numb and cold and they kind of feel like they're emotional robots, the safe zone is very unsatisfying. So it's safe, but it's like not a fun place to be. So sometimes people who have anxious avoidant attachment styles, like they want more, like they recognize that they shouldn't be this way. They recognize that they're missing something important in the relationship. They just don't know what to do about it. So going back, remember, this is the situation where, the parent comes back and the kid is like not really too messed up about it. They kind of remain unruffled. So I think the best way to kind of categorize this is using the word unruffled. So they're calm in the face of separation. And at the same time, they actually like, even though they appear calm, this is actually a mask for their internal distress. So these people may appear fiercely independent, but internally they're like really, really distressed about it. And this is what's really cool about this is, so, when researchers, they were doing this study like with 2-year-olds, right? So what researchers were trying to figure out is, okay, it seems like the kid actually doesn't care whether like mom is in the room or mom is not in the room. And they were theorizing like maybe this is a mask for distress. Like we're going to pretend to be strong and we're going to say like, even though they're internally like they're really freaking out, on the outside, they're like, yeah, it's no big deal. Like, I can handle this. I'm cool. Like, it's a shell. So what researchers did was measure the heart rates of the children who appeared to be completely fine. And what they actually found is that physiologically, these children are distressed. Okay? So what happened is like they would measure the heart rates, and what they'd find is that like the kid is putting on this facade of being like totally fine and not needing connection and being independent. But internally, their heart is hammering. Right? So they actually are physiologically very, very distressed. And so the anxious avoidant attachment style is sort of like a protection against like the emotional hurt. Okay? So what this actually means is that the kids are not actually fine, right? They may appear to be fine. And even in the case of the anxious avoidant attachment style, you may feel cold and numb, but it's not actually healthy. Like you've learned how to adapt to the circumstance, but it's not actually good for you. So the anxious avoidant attachment style is caused by when a child communicates their emotional needs and they essentially get like no response. So remember, the ambivalent attachment style is an inconsistent response, but the avoidant attachment style happens when you communicate your emotional needs and you get like essentially like a neutral response or no response. That's when you learn to become avoidant and also like fiercely independent, right? So what researchers sort of discovered is that when the parent's response to you is not influenced by you expressing your needs, you put up this emotional wall and you sort of like really rely on that independence. So when voicing your needs essentially does not get a good response. So like a classic example of this is like being told to man up, right? This is like the most classical example. Like I'm hurting, I go to my dad, and my dad is like, why are you crying? Like, men don't cry. Man up. And so this is also caused by your emotional needs being rebuffed. And this sort of creates like a really problematic cycle. And this is something that I see a lot, which is that like as men become more unable to communicate their emotional needs, their subtle attempts at emotional connection tend to be perceived as rebuffed. So remember, if I'm like independent and I'm an island and like I don't want to hurt myself, I don't want to risk being hurt. And furthermore, if I'm like kind of alexithymic and I don't understand what I feel or why I'm even upset, remember, I'm emotionally numb. So if I'm emotionally numb and don't feel a whole lot of stuff, when I like communicate to people that I have emotional needs, like I'm going to be really bad at that communication, right? Because I'm not going to be able to say like, hey, this really hurt me and I was really looking forward to spending this weekend with you, but you went out with your friends and I felt like emotionally neglected and unlovable. You don't know how to say that. So instead, what you do is like, you just ask your partner, you're like, hey, do you want to hang out on Sunday for brunch? And they're like, oh, I was planning on doing this. And you're like, okay, cool. And you don't tell them what it means to you. And then inside, what you feel is like that rejection, right? Because you never signaled to them. And the more you get rejected, the more independent you become, the more you like stay in that safe zone where you don't want to like get too close, but you also like really like your partner, right? So you don't want to like break up with them. And so you end up by withdrawing. So these infants withdraw from their caregivers. And this is where things get really weird, because actually what we do is like we withdraw just enough, but we never leave entirely. So we enter this like paradoxical like limbo zone, which is also like the safe zone, where it's like, I'm never going to get close to you, but I want to be close to you, so I'm never going to leave. And so it creates this kind of really tricky situation where like men have difficulty connecting. Women can do this too. But I think that men, once again, are more socialized to this kind of behavior. And so we kind of stay at the threshold of a close relationship, and we're scared to move closer and we're scared to move further away. Okay? So that's the anxious avoidant attachment style. Fiercely independent. I don't want to get too close. I don't want to get too far. I'm kind of safe over here, but I'm also unsatisfied. I have a lot of difficulty communicating my emotional needs. Okay? So now the question becomes, okay, like what do we do about this? Okay? Like, okay, so like Dr. K, this is fine. This is who I am. You've described me. I'm either the anxious ambivalent or the anxious avoidant person. I definitely fall into the camp of being like emotionally torn and having inner turmoil, or you're dating someone who's sending you mixed signals. Hey, are you upset with me? No, I'm fine. Did I do something wrong? No, it's fine. I'm telling you, it's fine. Right? Like that's one example. Or the avoidant. It's like, yeah, like whatever, man. Like you can do whatever you want to. And then like, you're like, wait, are you upset? No, man, I'm cool. It's all good. Like you do, it's fine. Like really, like. And then sometimes what you can even see is like, fear of becoming dependent, where it's sort of like, this is like where fear of commitment or like these other kind of, societal things that we say, oh, like this dude is afraid of commitment. It's not that he's afraid of I mean, maybe that's a good way to put it actually, but like there's other stuff going on, right? It's not like he doesn't just dislike commitment for the sake of commitment. It's sort of that, it's not that he's like afraid of commitment in general. It's that like he doesn't know if he can trust you. And this is where things get really confusing, because like he sends these like minor signals to his partner that are sort of like, hey, can I trust you? Are you like able to see what I'm feeling here? And then the partner is oblivious, which is not really their fault because the signals are very, very tiny. And then they get rebuffed and it sort of creates this like vicious cycle. So we kind of end up with this anxious ambivalent attachment style and anxious avoidant attachment style. Now, if we go back to the original research by Bowlby, what Bowlby kind of hypothesizes and what other people later hypothesized is that all this stuff is formed in childhood. So like if we sort of look at the people who are like intrinsically motivated and securely attached, they lucked out because they had good parents. And like I got the short stick because my parents were not emotionally available to me. So it turns out that that's actually not true. And now we're going to go to a really interesting article from Current Opinion in Psychology. So as people have started to look at the origin of attachment style and how attachment style develops, there's a really important lesson to be learned here, which is that foundations are not fate. And what this means is that your attachment style for early on is determined by socialization. So what this means is this is the parental influence, okay? So like when I'm a 1-year-old, my attachment style is absolutely determined by my parents for the most part, okay? But the cool thing that researchers have developed is that when you look at adults, the way that you are raised starts to matter less and less and less. And what matters is what they call selection effects. So socialization is your environment and selection is your choices. So people play an active role in selecting and shaping their interpersonal environments, which means that if you fall into one of these categories, your parents may have gotten you off on a particular trajectory, but it's ultimately the people that you choose to hang out with, which is going to determine whether your attachment style stays insecure or becomes secure. Okay? So this is your spawn point, right? Like this is my starting gear. But as it turns out, the further I go into the game, just like video games, the further I go into the game, I have more of a choice about how I play, right? Because when I spawn, like this is my starting equipment, like it's the same, like I can't do anything about that. But every level that I gain and every time like I get a new shop, I can start to control, what my gear looks like, how I spend my skill points, etc. So the cool thing, so if you're worried about this and you're asking me, what do I do about it? There are a couple of really simple things that we can do about it, okay? The first is to understand that your fate is not set in stone. And essentially, the people that you hang out with will determine how your attachment style evolves. So this is where you have to be really, really careful. So like, are the people that you're hanging out with able to emotionally like help you out some? Can they be supportive? Can you turn to someone and say, hey, I'm feeling kind of confused right now. Can you help me figure out how I feel? So we're going to give you actually some very key dialogue, okay? So if you fall into these categories, anxious ambivalent or anxious avoidant, what I want you to do when you're feeling a particular way, and remember, these are the signs, right? So if you're anxious ambivalent, you're going to feel angry, frustrated, confused, and you're going to feel dumb, right? So like you're going to have those feelings of anger and frustration. You're going to be kind of confused why you feel that way, and you're going to judge yourself for feeling that way. That's the presentation. So if you find yourself feeling that way, who is someone that you can communicate that to? And just communicate it to them directly, like ideally a romantic partner. So that's sort of the assumption we're having here. And you go to your partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, and you say, hey, I'm feeling, and if they ask you, is something wrong? You can even say something like, hey, I can't tell what's wrong, but something feels wrong. I am upset, but I don't understand why I'm upset. I am upset and I feel stupid for being upset. So you literally communicate to them what you're feeling. Now, why is this hard? Because when we think about emotional communication, we think that we should have everything figured out on the inside before we communicate with someone, right? Because we think to ourselves that like, what the hell is someone going to do with that? Yeah, I'm upset, but I don't know why I'm upset. Like, how are they supposed to deal with that? So then we feel ashamed for even communicating something that's like half-baked. Like, how would they deal with that? And I know that feels like very, very like stupid to do, but that's exactly what we need to do. Because here's the cool thing, right? Remember that attachment style has to do with emotional mirroring. So as you share a half-baked communication about your feelings, that gives your partner the opportunity to be like confused with you. They don't have to figure it all out, but then the two of y'all figure it out together. And so then they may say something like, okay, I don't know what to do with that. And then you're going to say, yeah, I don't know what to do with that. And that makes me feel stupid. And like, this is like, and then like, you may feel embarrassed for sort of saying that, but it's really amazing if you give your partner the opportunity to support you, and then like, they may say like, okay, I don't know what to do, but like, if something occurs to you, like, please let me know. And if you are the partner and someone shares something like that with you, you can kind of be honest with them. Hey, I want to help you, but I don't know how to help you. And, I'm going to try a couple things, or maybe you can make a suggestion, or like maybe we can work on this together, right? You don't have to figure out the answer, because fixing your attachment style is not about figuring out the answer. It's about not facing your problem alone. It's about emotional mirroring, not emotional correction. It's just about the other person meeting you where you're at. Okay? So to recap, the first thing that you need to do is, be a little bit careful with who you hang out with, and try to find people that you can share a half-baked thought with about your internal emotional state. The second thing that you need to do, so this is where, if you look at research for people who are securely attached versus people who are not securely attached, what you find is that securely attached individuals accept their own emotional needs, while insecurely attached individuals, especially anxious avoidant folks, do not. So like people believe that they can't rely on other people's support, which sort of makes sense, may have something to do with the historical way that they were raised. But the second thing that you need to do is acknowledge your own emotional needs, right? And that can be really confusing because you may not know exactly what they are, but acknowledge whatever you can. So you can at least acknowledge that I'm feeling angry and I'm feeling frustrated and I feel stupid for feeling this way. And if someone did do something that hurt your feelings, you have to be really careful because you have an emotional need, and what you do is denigrate or devalue your emotional need. And in your mind, you say, it's stupid for me to feel upset about this. And in doing so, you're actually not acknowledging your emotional need. So the second thing that you need to do is really be careful. Because if you're calling yourself stupid for having a particular emotional need, that's what you need to turn around, right? It's okay for you to have emotional needs that other people don't understand. Now, this is also where you don't have to blame them for it, right? But acknowledging your own emotional need is separate from someone else fulfilling or not fulfilling it. So you can even go to them and you can say, hey, I know that your friends were visiting from college, and I still really felt like I wanted to see you last weekend. And I do think objectively that you should spend time with them because obviously, they're only here once a year and I get to see you every week. So it makes sense to me to objectively for you to see them. And at the same time, I still really felt like I wanted to go to brunch with you. And I felt kind of emotionally rejected. And I acknowledge that may not make a whole lot of sense. But it's the need that I had. I felt lonely that weekend. Last weekend was I felt lonely. So you can kind of acknowledge your emotional need and just have to acknowledge it. You actually don't have to fulfill it. They don't actually have to change their behavior. The key thing is that securely attached individuals accept their emotional needs. And so this is the really tricky thing is that a lot of people how do I fix this? And this is where people get really confused because really fixing it does not actually have to do with changing much on the outside. Your partner doesn't actually have to change. And this is what's so damn confusing for them is when they ask you is something wrong and you say no, and then they're I don't know what I need to change. No one needs to change anything in terms of behavior. All that really needs to be changed is awareness, acknowledgement of your emotional needs, and then sharing those emotional needs for emotional mirroring with other people. Your partner doesn't actually have to skip out on the weekend with their college friends to go to brunch with you. That doesn't actually have to happen. All that has to happen is you need to acknowledge that emotional need and they need to hear you and sort of mirror it back. And they can say just hey, I understand that you feel lonely. This is really important to me. Can I make it up to you next weekend? That's all that has to happen. Okay? So just to summarize, I think a lot of the reason that men struggle in relationships has to do with the way that we're socialized and conditioned, and can be explained best by something called attachment theory. What attachment theory kind of relies on is this idea that how we relate to other people has to do with the way that our emotional needs were mirrored or met by our parents early in life. So for some people, our parents were really, or not necessarily parents, but just key emotional figures. So for some people, our parents were very inconsistent with the way that they responded to our emotional needs. Sometimes they were loving and sometimes they were neglectful. And that results in something called an anxious ambivalent attachment style, which is really characterized by turmoil and mixed signals. I feel angry, I feel frustrated, I feel stupid, I blame myself for feeling that way. When people ask me what's wrong, I say nothing's wrong when really something is wrong. So it's filled with mixed signals and can make relationships really difficult. For other people, their emotional needs were actually not really answered in any way. Or when I expressed an emotional need, what I was told is that my emotional need is not important. It's not necessarily neglect or abuse, which leads to a different kind of attachment style. It's the quintessential, this is when I go crying to my dad at the age of 7, and I say, hey, this person bullied me. And my dad is you need to man the F up and you have to if he pushes you, you've got to push back. It's like when kids are in a situation where they express an emotional need and they're met with like a wall, what the kid learns to do is put up the wall themselves. And so as adults, these people become fiercely independent, are afraid of forming connections, and keep people at arm's length. And so the solution to these things, and the good news is that early on we thought that this stuff was determined in childhood. Now, because of the primacy of selection effects, which basically means early on, you can't control your attachment style, but later on, it turns out that the people that you hang out with and how emotionally available they are can actually fix your attachment style. So the people you hang out with are going to be crucial. And what we want you to do to fix your attachment style is, first of all, become aware and acknowledge your own emotional needs, no matter how irrational they are. And secondly, communicate your half-baked, confusing, idiotic emotional needs to your partner. And let them emotionally mirror. Remember, they don't have to fix anything. They don't have to change themselves. They don't have to do any of that. All you really need to become more securely attached and understand your emotions better is for someone to just mirror and acknowledge what you feel. Okay? Questions?